A 10-year-old orphan disappeared in the taiga, but who she survived with shocked everyone. What made a 10-year-old girl go alone into the icy heart of the taiga? This question will haunt the residents of the taiga village of Ust-Karagai for a long time to come. But on that frosty November day, everything was horribly simple. The door to the bedroom of the state orphanage creaked. A small figure in an old but sturdy jacket slipped out into the street. In her hand, she clutched her only treasure, a faded photograph. In it, a smiling man in hiking clothes sat against a backdrop of snow-covered rocks. Far away on a ledge, almost a tiny dot, stood the silhouette of a snow leopard. These were her parents, and this was her destination. 10-year-old Anya Volkova wasn't running away from anything. She was running toward them. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. The air was crisp and frosty. Snow crunched merrily under her felt boots. The taiga, which began just beyond the village, did not frighten her. It seemed familiar, native, straight out of her zoologist father's stories. Anya walked confidently along the old logging road, occasionally checking his old compass. The needle trembled, pointing north, where the Sayan Mountains loomed darkly beyond the wall of the forest. The girl did not know what exactly she was looking for. Some specific rock, a ledge, a place where she would feel the warmth of her parents' hands again. In her pocket, besides the compass, was her father's diary. The tattered pages smelled of bonfires and taiga. She had read it hundreds of times, memorizing the names of herbs, the habits of animals, the rules of survival. Now this knowledge seemed like reliable armor to her. The first few hours of the flight were normal, but the taiga does not forgive naivety. The sky, which had been clear in the morning, was now covered with gray, shapeless clouds. First, fine snow began to fall, and then the wind howled like a hungry beast. A real blizzard arose. A white wall of snow crashed down on the forest, instantly erasing the road, tracks, and landmarks. The fairy tale forest turned into a roaring, white hell. Anya realized she was lost. Panic crept up on her with icy tentacles. She tried to turn off the invisible road and take shelter under the centuries-old cedars, but only lost her bearings completely. The wind knocked her off her feet and pierced her to the bone. The girl remembered her father's lessons. Fire. She needed fire. With trembling hands, she pulled a box of matches from her pocket. But her fingers wouldn't obey her, and the damp heads only scratched the box, producing no sparks. In the village, her disappearance was not noticed until evening. When the teacher did not find Anya at dinner, she raised the alarm. The news quickly spread throughout Ust-Karagai. Soon, a makeshift headquarters was set up in the orphanage. The head of the village, several local hunters, and a police squad. Among them all, the figure of Stepan Matveyevich Kravtsov, or simply Matveyich, stood out. An old hunter who knew every stone in this taiga. He stood at the window and silently watched the raging blizzard. He remembered Anya's parents, the desperate zoologists, Peter and Maria, well. He remembered how he had tried to dissuade them from taking that last, fateful route. And now their daughter, a small, lonely wolf cub, had followed in their footsteps. A dull, heavy feeling of guilt weighed on his chest. He should have visited more often to keep an eye on the girl. A couple of hours later, help arrived from the regional center. 2 UAZ vehicles from the Ministry of Emergency Situations and a snowmobile. A fit man in uniform got out of the lead vehicle. Captain Orlov. He quickly and efficiently unfolded a map and began giving orders. His voice was clear and confident, but he had no idea what a real Siberian blizzard was like. Comb the area 12:15 along the old logging road. The snowmobile will go ahead. The rest of you follow in a chain. Keep 5 meters between you. Report back every 15 minutes. Stepan Matveyevich smiled crookedly. Captain, what interval? You can't see anything 2 steps ahead. And there are no tracks. Everything is covered. Orlov shot the old man a quick, irritated glance. Your name? Stepan Kravtsov. I knew her parents. The girl went towards Goltzy. She carried their photo with her all the time. Goltzy? That's 40 kilometers away as the crow flies. A 10-year-old child? Impossible. She's somewhere here within 5 kilometers of the village. Most likely she found shelter and is waiting. Our task is to methodically comb the area. Leave your emotions and guesswork aside, Citizen Kravtsov. Meanwhile, Anya was no longer walking, but dragging herself along, moving her legs with her last ounce of strength. Snow had filled her boots, and the cold had numbed her body. Her consciousness began to blur. The forest turned into a carousel of black and white spots. She fell. Lying in the snow was warm and cozy. She wanted to just close her eyes and fall asleep. But some deep-seated will to live, inherited from her father, forced her to raise her head. A few meters away, through the veil of snow, she saw a dark opening. Rocks. A small grotto, almost a cave. It was her chance. Her last chance. Gathering the last of her strength, she crawled toward the dark spot, leaving a shallow furrow in the snow behind her. She climbed inside, into relative calm, and curled up on the cold rock. Her whole body was shaking, her teeth chattering like a machine gun. She knew this was the end. Here, in this icy hole, she would freeze to death without ever finding what she was looking for. And at that moment, when her strength was almost gone, a quiet, muffled growl came from deep within the cave. Anya froze, turning into an ice statue. Her heart seemed to stop. In the dim light, she made out a silhouette, large, muscular, covered in spotted fur. 2 green eyes stared at her from the darkness. It was a beast, a huge cat, a snow leopard, Urbis, as her father called it in his diary, the master of these mountains. The fear was so overwhelming that it paralyzed her. She couldn't scream or move. She just stared into those 2 burning eyes, waiting for the inevitable leap. But the beast didn't move. It just lay there watching. Its growl was not threatening, but rather tired and painful. A minute passed. 2. 5. Nothing happened. The leopard only occasionally raised its head and lowered it back onto its paws. And then Anya noticed that one of its hind legs was twisted unnaturally and covered in dried blood. The beast was wounded. The search continued throughout the night, but to no avail. The blizzard did not let up. People were exhausted, and the equipment was getting stuck in the snowdrifts. Captain Orlov was becoming increasingly gloomy. The statistics were grim. At such temperatures and with such winds, the child's chances of survival were dwindling with every passing hour. Stepan Matveyevich walked in the chain with everyone else, but his eyes were not looking at his feet, but into the distance, where the mountains could be glimpsed through the snowy whirlwind. He did not believe that Anya could have simply disappeared near the village. He knew the Volkovs' character. Stubbornness was in their blood. If the girl had made up her mind, she would see it through to the end. At dawn, when the blizzard had subsided a little, Orlov gathered the exhausted people around the headquarters vehicle. That's it. We're calling it a day. Everyone's exhausted, and we're getting nowhere. Let's go back to the village and warm up. In the afternoon, Weather permitting, we'll request a helicopter to fly over the area. We can't call it a day, Stepan said hoarsely. Now's the time. The snow has stopped. There may be tracks. What tracks, Father? Orlov sighed wearily. There's a meter of fresh snow here. If she left any tracks, they're gone. We're dealing with reality, not miracles. The girl is most likely. He didn't finish, but everyone understood. She was dead. She's alive, Stepan repeated stubbornly. I can feel it. Orlov just waved his hand and turned away, giving the order to leave. The exhausted and frozen men did not argue. Only Stepan remained standing, watching the receding vehicles. His eyes were cold and determined. If they didn't want to search, he would search alone. The night dragged on endlessly in the cave. The frost grew stronger. Anya realized that she simply wouldn't live to see the morning. Her shivering became uncontrollable. Her body stiffened. Urbis was also shivering. His breathing was ragged. And then, in the girl's mind, clouded by the cold, a crazy thought was born. Her father had written in his diary that Urbis were one of the least aggressive big cats. They avoided humans, attacking only as a last resort. And this one was wounded and weak. She had nothing to lose. Death by the claws of a predator or death from the cold. There was little difference. But there was another option: to survive. Driven by her last instinct for self-preservation, Anya slowly, inch by inch, began to crawl toward the beast. The lynx raised its head, its ears flattened. The muffled growling resumed. Anya froze. She looked straight into his green eyes and whispered quietly, almost silently, "I'm cold." She didn't know if he would understand her words, but she put all her despair into them. She made another move, and then another. Finally, her small, trembling body touched the warm, thick fur of the beast. The leopard tensed but did not pull away. Anya, no longer thinking clearly from the cold and fear, pressed herself against him with her whole body, burying her face in the thick fur that smelled of snow, wind, and wild freedom. The beast sighed heavily and relaxed. Two lonely, freezing creatures in an icy cave shared their last bit of warmth with each other to survive the endless polar night. In the morning, Stepan Matveyich quickly drank some hot tea, grabbed his rifle and backpack with supplies, and left the village again. He did not follow the official search route. He headed straight for the mountains, where he thought Anya might have gone. He did not look for tracks. It was useless. He was looking for signs. A broken branch, flattened moss under the snow. Something that only the eye of a taiga dweller could notice. He walked for several hours, stubbornly pushing northward. And there, in an open, windswept area, he saw something that made his heart stop. On a small patch where the wind had blown away the fresh snow, exposing the dense crust, a chain of tracks was visible. A small, almost childish footprint. And next to it, Stepan dropped to his knees, not believing his eyes. Next to the child's footprint was another, a huge round paw print of a large cat, an Urbis. He looked at the footprint again. There was no doubt. The tracks were fresh, left after the blizzard. They led north into the heart of the mountain range. His head was spinning. This couldn't be. A child and a snow leopard walking together? It sounded like nonsense, a taiga tale for tourists. But the tracks were real. Stepan returned to the village at lunchtime. He burst into the headquarters, where Captain Orlov was talking on the radio with his superiors, reporting that further ground searches were futile. "I found it," Stepan shouted from the doorway, holding out his phone with a photo of the tracks. "I found her tracks." Orlov tore himself away from the radio and gave the hunter a heavy look. He took the phone and looked at the photo. "What is that?" he asked in an even voice. It's her track, and a snow leopard's track. They're walking together. We need to turn the search in that direction immediately. Silence fell in the room. Several rescuers and police officers looked at each other. Their faces showed sympathy mixed with bewilderment. Captain Orlov slowly returned the phone. Kravtsov, he said wearily, like a doctor speaking to a hopeless patient. I understand how you feel. You knew the family, you're worried. But we have to face the facts. Most likely the girl is dead. And what you found, it could be anything. A lynx, a wolverine, and a child's footprint. Who knows who was walking around here before the blizzard? What lynx? Look at the size of it. Stepan exploded. It's an Urbis, and the tracks are fresh. She's alive, I'm telling you. Enough. Orlov cut him off sharply. The operation is proceeding according to plan. The helicopter will fly over the distant squares if the weather doesn't get worse. And your fantasies? Keep them to yourself. We don't have the resources to chase ghosts across the taiga. Is that clear? Stepan looked at the captain, his face turning to stone. He realized it was useless to argue. This man in uniform saw nothing but his instructions and maps. He didn't see the taiga. He didn't feel it. Stepan silently turned and left the headquarters. He would no longer try to prove anything. He would go alone. Even if everyone thought he was a crazy old man, he had to. Because somewhere out there in that icy hell, a little girl, his friend's daughter, was still waiting for help. And judging by the incredible tracks, she was not alone. Stepan didn't look back. He didn't go home for food or extra clothes. Everything he needed was always in his backpack. That was the law of the taiga. Be prepared. He headed toward the mountains, following the tracks that were now invisible but clearly indicated by his years of intuition. He didn't just believe that Anya was alive. He knew he had to go because there was no one else left. The face of Anya's father, Peter Volkov, flashed in his mind. Once, sitting by the campfire, he had said to him, Matveyich, the taiga is neither evil nor good. It just is. And it always tests your strength. The main thing is not to break. Now the taiga was testing his daughter's strength, and his own. Morning came quietly and frighteningly in the cave. Anya woke up because she stopped feeling cold. The warmth emanating from the huge body next to her was a lifesaver. She opened her eyes. The beast was lying next to her, his chest rising and falling steadily. He was asleep too. The girl was afraid to move. In the dim morning light, she could see her involuntary companion better. It was an old female. Her gray fur with dark spots was matted in places, and blood oozed from a wound on her hind paw. The snow leopard was not the fearsome predator in her father's photograph, but a tortured, suffering creature. Suddenly, pity overcame her fear. She remembered how her father had treated their dog's wounds. Careful not to wake the beast, she crawled toward the cave entrance. She gathered a handful of clean, loose snow and returned. The snow leopard opened its eyes. They looked at each other. Anya held out her hand with the snow toward its wound. The beast growled softly, raising its head. But there was no malice in its growl, more of a warning. Quiet, quiet, whispered the girl, just as her father had once whispered to her when they saw a deer in the forest. She carefully applied the snow to the inflamed skin around the wound. The snow leopard flinched, but allowed her to continue. The day brought a new challenge, hunger. Her empty stomach was cramping. Anya knew that without food, she would not last long. Urbis was hungry too. He tried to get up several times, but his wounded paw would not hold him. He crawled a few meters and lay down again, exhausted. There was no hope that he would bring back any prey. She would have to act herself. Anya went over her father's lessons in her mind again and again. He had told her about edible roots that could be found in winter under the snow at the foot of cliffs, where the ground did not freeze so deeply. He had shown her how to make simple snares for hares out of willow twigs. Theory was one thing. Practice turned out to be much more difficult. She dug in the icy ground under the rock for several hours, breaking all her nails, but managed to dig up a few pale, carrot-like roots. They were bitter and fibrous, but it was food. Her attempt to make a snare failed. The frozen twigs broke in her unskilled hands. In the evening, hungry and exhausted, she returned to the cave. Urbis was lying in the same place. Anya ate one root and held the second one out to the animal. The leopard sniffed it and turned away. The girl sighed, sat down next to him, and pressed herself against his warm side. Thus passed the first day of their survival together. Meanwhile, in the village, the search operation officially entered a passive phase. Captain Orloff managed to get a helicopter. The rotary-winged machine circled over the taiga for several hours, but the pilots reported the same thing. Solid white veil, forest, rocks, no signs of activity, object not found. For Orlov, this was confirmation that he was right. He sat in the warm headquarters, filling out reports and preparing to report to his superiors on the termination of the active search phase due to the lack of chances of finding the child alive. He was not particularly concerned about the disappearance of Stepan Kravtsov. A local hunter who had gone into the taiga on his own was his personal problem. Orlov made a note in his journal. Have a chat with Mr. Kravtsov about him breaking the rules set by the head of the search and rescue team. He was a man of the system, and in his system there were no miracles. Children did not survive in the taiga in winter in the company of snow leopards. Stepan kept going. He did not eat and hardly rested, moving with the persistence of a well-oiled machine. He had long since lost the first set of tracks, but he no longer needed them. They had given him direction. Now he was reading the taiga itself. Here, on a cedar branch, was a tuft of fur. The snow leopard had rubbed against the trunk. And here, a barely visible scratch on a rock, was a torn claw. These were not evidence for Captain Orlov. They were letters in a sentence that only he could read. He understood that the snow leopard was wounded. A healthy animal would have moved differently. Its tracks would have been different. This meant that they couldn't have gone far. They were somewhere nearby, looking for shelter. And they were both weak. The race against time was becoming increasingly desperate. Stepan had been walking for more than a day. The frost and wind were exhausting even his hardened body. But he pushed away any thoughts of rest. He imagined Anya, her large, serious eyes, and quickened his pace. He couldn't let Peter down a second time. 3 days passed. Anya and Urbis survived. Their life fell into a strange, silent routine. In the morning, Anya would go out in search of food. She managed to find a few more roots. Once she stumbled upon a cedar tree from which the wind had knocked down several cones. The nuts were a real feast. But it wasn't enough. She was wasting away before our eyes. Urbis hardly moved. His wound looked worse and worse, and his paw was swollen. He no longer growled, but only whimpered quietly in his sleep. But his presence saved Anya from more than just the cold. One evening, as she was returning to the cave, she heard a howl, and then she saw them. A pack of 5 wolves stood on the crest of a nearby hill and looked toward her refuge. The predators smelled blood and weakness. Anya froze behind a tree, not breathing. The wolves were in no hurry. They circled, checking out the situation. One of them, the largest, the leader, took a few steps toward the cave. At that moment, a low, guttural roar came from the darkness of the grotto. It was Urbis's roar. It was weak, but it still sounded like the power of the king of the mountains. The wolves stopped. They knew that even a wounded leopard was a deadly enemy. After standing there for a while longer, the pack reluctantly withdrew. Anya realized that she and the leopard needed each other. She needed to bring snow to his wound and share the meager food he couldn't eat. He needed her presence to scare away other, more real predators. Their alliance was not a miracle, but a harsh necessity. On the 5th day, Stepan was on the verge of exhaustion. He was walking on sheer stubbornness. He found a place to spend the night, a small hollow in the snow with snow leopard tracks and small footprints nearby. That meant he was on the right track, but his strength was leaving him. He sat down on a fallen tree to catch his breath. Suddenly, his gaze caught something on the branch of a low bush, something that shouldn't have been there. He moved closer. It was a piece of red wool, bright, artificial, just like the pom-pom on the hat Anya wore when she left the orphanage. Stepan took off his glove and carefully picked up his find. He held it up to his eyes. There was no doubt. It was her. The girl had been here, and she had been here very recently. The wind had not yet managed to blow away this little thread, this desperate signal left behind in the taiga. Something inside the old man broke, and then immediately reassembled, filling him with a new, fierce strength. He no longer felt tired or cold. He knew he would find her. He stood up and looked north. Somewhere out there, among those silent rocks, she was waiting. And in the cave, things were getting worse. Urbis was completely weakened. He had even stopped trying to stand up. Anya sat next to him, stroking his big head and whispering words of comfort. Hunger became a constant companion. The roots were gone. At night, she heard the wolves howling again, this time much closer. In the morning, she saw their tracks right at the entrance to the cave. The wolves were checking how weak the defender of this place was. They sensed that his time was running out. Anya knew that soon they would grow bold and attack. Fear gave way to cold despair. She found the heaviest stone she could lift in the cave. It was her only weapon. In the evening, as twilight began to gather over the taiga, they came. 5 dark silhouettes rose silently from the darkness at the entrance to the cave. Their yellow eyes burned with hungry fire. Urbis struggled to raise his head and let out a hollow, hoarse growl. It no longer frightened them. The leader of the pack, a large, seasoned wolf, took a step forward, baring his fangs. Then another. They were no longer afraid. They had come to kill. Anya jumped to her feet, shielding the wounded leopard, and swung the rock at them with a cry. The wolves paused for a moment, but did not retreat. They began to slowly circle her, coming in from the flanks. The ring tightened. The leader of the pack took the last, decisive step. The muscles on his neck rolled under his skin, preparing to spring. Anya closed her eyes, holding the stone in front of her like a fragile shield. Urbis's hoarse growl behind her almost died away. At that moment, the icy silence was shattered by the deafening, dry crack of a gunshot. The sound hit her ears, echoed off the rocks, and died away. The leader of the pack let out a shrill cry, jumped up, and leaped backward. The other wolves, seized by panic, instantly turned and disappeared into the twilight as if they had never been there. Silence reigned once more in the clearing in front of the cave, broken only by the ringing in Annie's ears and the beating of her own heart. She opened her eyes. A man emerged from behind the trees, leaning heavily on his rifle as if it were a walking stick. He was tall and thin, wearing a worn sheepskin coat. His face, covered with gray stubble and wrinkles, was gray with fatigue. He took a few steps and stopped, peering into the dark opening of the cave. Anya did not recognize him at first. She could only see the silhouette of her savior. "Matveyich?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. Stepan Kravtsov slowly lowered his rifle. He looked at the small, emaciated figure of the girl standing at the entrance to the cave. Then his gaze shifted, and he saw what his brain refused to believe. Behind the girl, on the rocks, lay a huge spotted cat, a snow leopard. The old man froze, unable to utter a word. The scene was so unreal, so surreal, that for a moment he thought he too was going mad from hunger and cold. But no, the girl was real, and the beast behind her was real. "Anya, my girl," he finally managed to say, taking a step forward. "What is this?" He came closer. Anya didn't move, still clutching the now useless stone in her hand. Stepan knelt down in front of her. He looked into her huge, sunken eyes, which showed neither childish joy nor fear, only bottomless, inhuman exhaustion. He gently took the stone from her and threw it aside. Then he took his backpack off his shoulder and took out a flask. "Here, drink this. It's still warm." His voice was hoarse and unusually soft. Anya obediently took a few sips of warm, sweet tea. The invigorating warmth slowly spread through her frozen body. Stepan took out a piece of dried meat and a cracker. "Eat, little by little." He watched her eat, unable to take his eyes off the beast. The snow leopard was breathing heavily, its sides heaving. Stepan, an experienced hunter, immediately assessed the situation. The wound on its paw had become infected, and the area around it was swollen. Sepsis. The beast was dying. He looked at Anya, at her torn clothes, at her scratched, frostbitten hands. She had survived. She had survived here, in this frozen hell, next to a predator. Not by some miracle, thanks to him. Stepan got up. "We have to go. Right now. I'll get you out of here. We can't stay here." Anya finished chewing the cracker and looked at him. A shadow of her former stubbornness appeared in her eyes. "I won't leave him," she said quietly but firmly, nodding toward the lynx. "He saved me. The wolves, they would have eaten me, and he drove them away. Anechka, he won't survive." Stepan tried to explain as gently as possible. "He's badly wounded. I can't help him here. And you need to get to a doctor, somewhere warm right away." "No," she repeated, her voice ringing with metal. "We're taking him too. You're strong. You can do it." Stepan looked at the carcass of the animal, which weighed at least 50 kilograms, at the exhausted girl, and felt his own fatigue breaking his bones. He realized that arguing was useless. This girl was made of the same stuff as her father. The Volkov's stubbornness could move mountains. He sighed. There was only one way out. He reached into the inside pocket of his sheepskin coat and took out an old satellite phone. His last hope. He fumbled with the frozen buttons for a long time, moving away from the rocks in search of a signal. Finally, a single strip of light appeared on the screen. The battery indicator flashed red menacingly. He had one chance. He dialed the number for the emergency services headquarters. In a warm hut in Ust-Karagai, Captain Orlov was finishing his evening report. The call from the satellite phone came as a complete surprise. He picked up the receiver. "PSO headquarters, Captain Orlov speaking." "Captain, this is Kravtsov," came a hoarse, broken voice over the line, interspersed with crackling interference. "I found her. She's alive." Orlov sat up straight. He recognized the voice of the old hunter. Kravtsov, where are you? Are you okay? You don't sound very good. I'm fine. She's alive. Do you understand? The voice on the other end of the line was breaking up. At the Devil's Dozen Pass, in the rocks. We need urgent evacuation. A helicopter. I understand, Kravtsov. Give me the exact coordinates, Orlov said, already unfolding a map. Is the girl injured? Frostbite. There was a short pause filled with static. Then Stepan's voice said something that made Orlov freeze with a pencil in his hand. She's not alone. There's an Urbis with her, a snow leopard. He's wounded, very badly. He needs to be taken out too. Orlov was silent. He looked at the map, but he couldn't see it. Kravtsov's last words replayed in his head. Snow leopard. It needs to be taken too. The picture formed instantly, and it was far from reality. An old man, alone, several days in the taiga, on the verge of exhaustion. He found a girl, possibly already dead. Shock, hypothermia, hunger. His mind couldn't take it. Kravtsov, Orlov said in an even, calm tone, the way you talk to people in a state of shock. Listen to me carefully. You most likely have hypothermia and severe exhaustion. This causes visual and auditory hallucinations. What the hell is hypothermia? Stepan exploded. I'm telling you the truth. There's a beast lying a meter away from me. The girl won't let me leave him. She survived thanks to him. Stepan Matveyevich. Orlov's voice became steely, brooking no argument. Stop talking nonsense. Your job right now is to save yourself and, if you're lucky, the child. Give us your coordinates if you can, and stay where you are. We'll send a team as soon as we can. There are no Urbis there. Over. There were a few short beeps in the receiver. Orlov hung up. He rubbed his temples. Crazy old man. Not only did he almost die himself, but now he's making up nonsense and confusing the rescuers. He looked at the radio. Sending a team out at night into the rocks to find a man who was clearly not in his right mind was a huge risk. The decision came easily. They would wait until morning. The morning is wiser than the evening. Stepan stood in the middle of a snow-covered clearing with a silent phone in his hand. He stared at the black screen, which no longer showed a signal or battery charge. He stared at the dark opening of the cave where the little girl and the dying animal were sitting. He looked at the hostile, silent taiga around him. And for the first time in many years, he felt absolute, all-consuming loneliness. They hadn't just misunderstood them. They hadn't believed them. They had been abandoned here, his words dismissed as the ravings of a madman. Night fell on the mountains, and with it came the frost. And somewhere out there in the darkness, hungry wolves still roamed. Stepan clenched his fists until his knuckles cracked. Despair gave way to cold, calculating rage. He didn't believe him? He thought he was crazy? Fine. He would prove it. He would get them out of there himself. Or he would lie down here next to them. He returned to the cave. Anya looked at him hopefully. Will they come? Stepan didn't lie to her. No, he replied briefly. The connection is bad. They didn't understand. We need to hold out until morning. He didn't say that no one would come in the morning either. He began to take action. First things first, safety. Stepan gathered all the dry wood he could find nearby and built a large, hot fire at the entrance to the cave. The fire not only provided warmth, but also served as a reliable defense against wolves. Now they could tend to the wounded. He approached the Urbis. The beast watched his every move, but it no longer had the strength to attack. Quiet, quiet, handsome, Stepan muttered, carefully examining the wound. Let's see what we've got here. The picture was bad. The paw was swollen, and the skin around the wound was hot. Stepan took his first aid kit out of his backpack, a flask of alcohol, a bandage, and a small pocket knife. He knew that without antibiotics, it was all useless, but he had to try. "Anya, bring some more snow." And hold his head. Talk to him. Just be careful. The girl nodded. She sat down next to the leopard and began to stroke him, whispering something softly. Surprisingly, the animal seemed to calm down under her hands. Stepan heated the knife over the fire, moistened a rag with alcohol, and prepared himself. It was the strangest veterinary operation of his life. The night dragged on agonizingly. Stepan did everything he could. He washed the wound and applied a clean bandage. He knew that this was only a temporary measure. Without qualified help, the animal was doomed. The three of them sat by the fire. The emaciated old man, the skinny girl, and the dying king of the mountains. Stepan divided the rest of the food between himself and Anya, making her eat most of it. He told her stories about the taiga and her father, trying to distract her from her fear and the cold. He saw her wrapping herself in her old jacket and gave her his sheepskin coat. He was left in just a sweater, constantly throwing wood on the fire. He couldn't allow himself to sleep. He had to hold out until dawn. When the first rays of sun touched the snow-covered peaks, Stepan made a decision. Waiting for help was pointless. He had to get Anya out himself. And the snow leopard, he would have to leave it behind. It was cruel, but there was no choice. The girl's life was more important. "Anya," he said when she woke up, "we have to go, now, while it's still light." The girl looked at him, then at the snow leopard. The snow leopard was breathing heavily, wheezing. "What about him?" she asked. Stepan looked away. "He'll stay here. We can't carry him." "No." Anya's eyes filled with tears. "For the first time in all this time. No, we won't leave him. You promised." "I didn't promise. I said we'd try," Stepan replied harshly, but immediately softened. "Anechka, you have to understand. It's 2 days' walk to the village if we go fast. You can barely stand up, and he weighs more than I do. I can't. We have to save you." "Then I'm staying too," she declared stubbornly, sitting down next to the leopard and hugging his neck. "Go on your own." Stepan realized he had lost. This little girl with a steel core inside her would not back down. She was ready to die here with her savior. And at that moment, something changed in Stepan himself. He looked at this incredible pair, a child and a beast. Two lonely souls who had found each other in the middle of an icy hell. And he realized that he couldn't separate them, even if it cost him his life. He would kill the pragmatist and the hunter inside him. He would do the impossible. "All right," he exhaled. "All right. We'll go together." Meanwhile, in Ust-Karagai, the morning began with a scandal. One of the young rescuers who had overheard Orlov's nighttime conversation with Kravtsov couldn't keep it to himself and told the village chief everything. The news that Matveyich had found the girl alive and that Orlov had refused to send help, considering him crazy, spread instantly throughout the village. Local men, hunters, lumberjacks, those who had known Stepan for decades, gathered at the administration building. They didn't believe in snow leopards, but they believed Matveyich. If he said he found her, then he found her. The angry crowd demanded immediate action from Orlov. The captain stepped out onto the porch and was met with a wall of silent, icy condemnation. His authority collapsed in an instant. He tried to justify himself, talking about instructions and Kravtsov's inadequate condition, but no one listened to him. "If the Ministry of Emergency Situations doesn't want to save its own, we'll go ourselves," someone shouted from the crowd. Orlov realized that the situation was out of control. He didn't need a popular uprising in a taiga village. With a heavy heart, under pressure from the public and the village head, he gave the order to prepare a rescue team. He was still convinced that it was a futile endeavor and that Kravtsov was simply delusional. But now he needed to save not someone else, but his own reputation. Stepan's plan was crazy and desperate. He built a kind of sled out of 2 young fir trees and ropes. The work was hard. His hands were numb from the cold and fatigue. Anya helped as best she could, handing him branches and untangling the ropes. The most difficult task was to move the snow leopard onto the makeshift sled. The beast was as heavy as a rock. Stepan, straining his back, with Anya's help, who pushed and pulled as best she could, inch by inch dragged the snow leopard from the cave onto the sled. The snow leopard did not resist, only moaning softly in pain. When everything was ready, Stepan harnessed himself to the contraption. He tied the rope around his waist and pulled. The sled moved. They set off, slowly, staggering, sinking into the snow. Stepan pulled the load, which was heavier than he was, behind him. Anya walked beside him, supporting the snow leopard's head so that it did not hit the rocks, and whispered something to him constantly. It was like a strange, tragic procession. An emaciated old man dragging a dying predator through the snow, and a little girl walking beside him like a guardian angel. They moved south toward home. Every step was a victory. Every meter was a feat. A rescue team on 2 snowmobiles, led by Captain Orlov himself, set out from the village. Orlov was angry at the stubborn old man, at these wild locals, at the whole situation. He rode ahead, scanning the snow-covered expanse. He was sure they were looking for either 2 corpses or 1 madman. He drove the snowmobile at top speed, wanting to end this farce as soon as possible. After several hours of driving, they reached the foot of the pass. And there, in the snow, they saw a trail, a wide groove pressed into the snow, as if someone had been dragging something. Orlov stopped the snowmobile. He followed the trail. The tracks were fresh. They led down from the mountains. Orlov walked a few more dozen meters and froze. Ahead, about 100 meters away, he saw them. He rubbed his eyes, not believing what he was seeing. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. An old man, bent over double, was pulling a homemade sled behind him. Something large and spotted lay on the sled. And next to the sled walked a little girl in a huge sheepskin coat. Captain Orlov, a pragmatist and skeptic, a man who believed only in instructions and facts, stood and stared at the living refutation of all laws of logic and common sense. He looked at the miracle he refused to believe in. For a few moments, Captain Orlov's world narrowed to this one incredible picture. The roar of snowmobiles behind him, the frosty air, his official duties, all faded into the background. He saw only the trio slowly trudging through the snow-covered wilderness. The old man took another step, staggered, and fell to his knees, but did not let go of the rope. The girl immediately ran up to him, trying to help him up. Orlov came to his senses. "Forward!" he shouted to his men, his voice breaking. "Faster!" The rescuers rushed forward, kicking up whirlwinds of snow. A minute later, they were there. Stepan heard the roar of the engines and raised his head. There was no joy or relief in his eyes, only endless fatigue and silent righteousness. Anya clung fearfully to the sled, shielding Urbis with her body. "It's all right, little girl," said one of the rescuers, jumping off the snowmobile. "We're friends." Orlov ran up to them. He looked at Stepan, then at Anya, then at the huge, motionless beast. Urbis was alive. but his breathing was barely noticeable. Kravtsov, Orlov began, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? Apologize? Admit he was wrong? Now was not the time for that. Medic, get here, quick! The paramedic rushed to Anya, examining her. Others surrounded Stepan, helping him to his feet. Frostbite, severe exhaustion, the paramedic said briefly to Orlov. Both of them need to go to the hospital immediately. What about him? Anya asked, pointing at the lynx. He needs help too. Orlov looked at the animal. Protocol required reporting the wounded predator to the appropriate services, cordoning off the area and waiting for specialists. But he looked into the girl's pleading eyes and the old man's stubborn eyes. And he understood that protocol could not be followed here. He had already broken every rule in the book when he chose not to believe them. Perhaps it was time to break another one to set things right. Load them all up, he ordered, surprised by his own voice. Put the girl and the old man on one snowmobile and wrap them in thermal blankets. And the animal, the beast, on the cargo sled. Carefully. Let's go. Quickly. The return trip turned into a race against time. The news relayed by Orlov on the radio had the effect of a bomb going off in the village. The target has been found. The girl is alive. Kravtsov is alive. We're evacuating them. And, a wounded snow leopard. The operator at base repeated the last words 3 times before he could believe it. When the rescue team entered Ust-Karagai, the entire village came out to meet them. People silently stepped aside to let the snowmobiles pass. They looked at the exhausted Anya and Stepan. Then their eyes were drawn to the cargo sled, where a huge spotted body lay on a tarpaulin. Shock, disbelief, amazement. These were the 3 stages that every resident of the village went through. Anya and Stepan were immediately taken to the small village hospital. But no one knew what to do with the leopard. He was carefully carried to an empty, cold garage at the administration building. Orlov, realizing that this was a unique situation, contacted the regional center, reported everything to his superiors, and requested urgent assistance from a veterinarian specializing in wildcats. His report was listened to in deathly silence. No one knew how to respond to such a situation. The story had already begun to spread beyond the village, promising to become a global sensation. In the hospital, Anya warmed up, ate, and came to her senses a little. But she refused to fall asleep until she heard from her savior. Stepan was lying under an IV in the next room. His body, hardened by decades of life in the taiga, had withstood an inhuman strain, but was now at its limit. He too asked only about Anya. Captain Orlov, leaving his work at headquarters, came to the hospital. He entered Stepan's room. The old man lay with his eyes closed, but he was not asleep. Matveyich, Orlov said quietly. Stepan opened his eyes. The captain began, and for the first time in his life, he found it difficult to find the right words. I was wrong. I should have believed you. I'm sorry. Stepan was silent for a long time, staring at the ceiling. It's not me you need to forgive, he finally said. You almost ruined them. With your instructions. The taiga, Captain, lives by different laws. Here, sometimes you have to listen to your heart, not just your head. Orlov nodded. He would remember this lesson for the rest of his life. By evening, a helicopter arrived in the village. But it wasn't carrying journalists, who had already been turned away at the outskirts, but a specialist from the capital's nature reserve. It was Andrei Belozertsev, one of the country's best veterinarians, specializing in big cats. Seeing the snow leopard, he just shook his head. It's a serious case. Sepsis in an advanced stage, exhaustion, Dehydration. To be honest, there's almost no chance. It's amazing he's still alive. Belozertsev and his assistant set up a field operating room in the garage. They fought for the animal's life for several hours, administering antibiotics and anti-shock drugs and treating the wound. Anya, who had escaped from the ward, stood at the half-open garage door and watched. Orlov noticed her, but did not chase her away. He stood silently beside her. He understood that something much greater than the life of a wild animal was at stake for this girl. Days passed. The story of Anya Volkova and the snow leopard that saved her spread around the world. In Ust-Karakai, journalists tried to break through the cordons. Zoological experts gave comments, most of which boiled down to the fact that what had happened was a unique, one-in-a-million case. The snow leopard's behavior was explained by a combination of factors. He was old, wounded, unable to hunt, and possibly apathetic. The warmth emanating from the child was his last chance to survive in the harsh cold. It was not an act of friendship, but a rare example of interspecies symbiosis on the brink of survival. Anya and Stepan were on the mend. The old hunter, learning that Anya was going to be returned to the orphanage, went to the head of the administration and said briefly, "I'm taking her. Arrange for guardianship." No one objected. Everyone understood that these two could not be separated now. Stepan did not just save the girl. He became her family, the only person who believed in her miracle and went through hell to prove it. Urbis, whom Anya never gave a name other than the one she had in her mind, survived. Against all odds. Veterinarian Belozertsev called it the second miracle. The predator's healthy body, supported by powerful therapy, was able to fight off the infection. It was decided to transfer him to a rehabilitation center for wild animals. On the day a special transport van came for him, Anya came to say goodbye. The animal, already beginning to recover but still weak, was carried to a cage on a stretcher. When they carried him past Anya, he opened his green eyes for a moment and looked at her. There was no recognition or gratitude in his gaze. It was still the same look of a wild, free animal. But Anya thought she saw something else in his eyes, something that would forever remain their secret. Several months passed. Anya lived in Stepan's house. She was no longer a withdrawn and frightened girl. The taiga, which had nearly killed her, had paradoxically healed her soul. She had found what she was looking for, not a place in a photograph, but a connection with nature, with her parents, whom she now understood as never before, and with the grumpy old man who had become a real grandfather to her. One evening, she and Stepan were watching the news. A report from the Sayan Nature Reserve told of a unique operation to return a rescued female snow leopard to the wild. The camera showed the cage opening. A huge spotted cat, strong and graceful, stepped out into freedom. She took a few steps, breathed in the mountain air, and before disappearing behind the rocks, she turned for a moment and looked straight into the camera. Anya approached the screen and pressed her palm against it. She didn't cry. She smiled. Her story was over. But at the same time, it was just beginning. What do you think was the main reason for Anya's survival? Animal instinct, a unique set of circumstances, or something more that science cannot yet explain?